Welcome to Sheriff Files. Please like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where are you watching from tonight. Get comfortable, relax, and let's begin. By dawn, the water was clean again, but the footprints were still there. They led away from the old mason well in perfect, evenly spaced tracks, each one a dark, muddy oval pressed into Mrs. Hollister's freshly mowed lawn. The prints continued down Sycamore Street, past the rusted town sign, and vanished somewhere near the abandoned feed store. Nobody in Mason's Creek had walked that path during the night. I'd stake my badge on it. My name's Sheriff Frank Tanner. 43 years wearing this star, and I'm finally setting down the story I swore I'd take to my grave. My hands shake something awful now, arthritis mostly, though the doctors say the tremors are from something else. The medication helps, but the memories still come back clearer than they should for a man my age. Especially at night. The rainstorm hit on a Tuesday in late September, 1997. Mason's Creek gets maybe 3 or 4 real gully washers a year, but this one tore through like God himself had a grievance. Lightning struck the old hickory by the town hall and split it clean down the middle. The creek swelled past its banks and flooded the soccer field behind the elementary school. And somewhere on the outskirts of town, the ground shifted just enough to crack the concrete seal on the Mason well. That well had been there longer than the town itself. The original homesteader, Elijah Mason, dug it back in 1847, if the town records are to be believed. Deep enough to hit water even in the worst drought years. Good, clean water too, until 1953, when 3 children died after drinking from it. Typhoid was the official cause, written in neat cursive on death certificates now yellowed and brittle in the town archive. The well was sealed with concrete a week later, a decision unanimous among the town council. But I'd heard whispers from the old-timers when I was just a rookie. How those children's skin had turned gray before they died. How their eyes had sunk so deep into their skulls you could barely see them. How they'd whispered strange words in their fevered sleep, words that weren't English or any other language the doctor recognized. Just old folk being superstitious, I'd thought. Every small town has its tales. I got the call about the footprints from Mrs. Hollister at 6:17 a.m., just as I was pouring my first cup of coffee. The storm had knocked out power to most of the town, and I'd spent the night coordinating with the electric company and checking on our more elderly residents. I hadn't slept more than 20 minutes at a stretch. "You need to come see this, Frank," she said, her voice tight. Eleanor Hollister was 79 and had taught 3rd grade to practically everyone in town, including me. She didn't rattle easy. "There's something in my yard." The cruiser's tires crunched over fallen branches as I pulled up to her neat white colonial on Sycamore. She was waiting on the porch in a faded blue housecoat, arms crossed tight against the morning chill. "Over there," she said, pointing toward her side yard without stepping off the porch. "By the rose bushes." The grass was still wet with dew and rainwater, soaking through my boots as I walked across her lawn. The footprints were immediately obvious, dark mud against the green grass, perfectly formed. Like someone had dipped their bare feet in paint and walked with careful, deliberate steps. I crouched down, my old knees protesting. The mud was thick, clay-like, darker than the soil around Mason's Creek, which tends towards sandy loam. Each footprint was deep, pressed hard into the grass. Adult-sized, but narrow. Long toes. And they led directly from the old Mason well. "Nobody should have been able to get into that well," I muttered, more to myself than to Mrs. Hollister, who'd finally ventured off her porch to stand behind me. "Those aren't right, Frank," she said quietly. When I looked up at her, her face was pale. "Look at them closer." I did. At first, I didn't see what she meant. Then it hit me. There was something wrong with the arrangement of the toes. They were too long, too evenly spaced. And there was something else, something that made my stomach tighten. The ball of each foot seemed deeper, more pronounced than a human foot would leave. Like whatever had made these tracks carried its weight differently. Probably just distorted from the water, I said, not believing it even as the words left my mouth. I'll follow them, see where they lead. I tracked the footprints down Sycamore, past the Methodist church and the hardware store. They never deviated, never hesitated, a straight line from the well toward the edge of town. The strange thing was, they didn't fade as they went. Each one was pressed just as deep as the last, the mud still damp despite the morning sun. They ended abruptly at the crumbling foundation of the old feed store, a building that had been abandoned since the late 70s. Just stopped, like whatever had made them had simply vanished, or gone inside. The feed store had been boarded up for decades, but one of the plywood sheets over a side window had rotted and fallen away. I shone my flashlight through the gap. Empty. Just concrete floors covered in dust, rat droppings, and old feed sacks. No footprints disturbed the thick layer of dust inside. I returned to the cruiser and radioed Deputy Mills to meet me at the Mason well. He was a good kid, though. Kid wasn't quite right anymore. He'd been with the department almost 15 years by then. Still had that earnestness, though. Still believed most problems could be solved with enough daylight and common sense. The well sat on a small parcel of county land, surrounded by an old iron fence that had long ago surrendered to rust. The concrete cap, a full foot thick according to town records, had a jagged crack running through it, about 8 inches wide at its broadest point. Not wide enough for an adult to squeeze through, but enough to look down into the darkness below. "Think some kid could have fallen in?" Mills asked, shining his flashlight into the crack. The beam disappeared into blackness. "And then climbed out and walked away?" I shook my head. "Besides, look at the footprints. They started right at the edge of the concrete cap. Not around it, not near it, right at the crack, as if whatever made them had squeezed through that narrow gap and stepped directly onto the grass." "Could be a prank," Mills suggested. "Some teenagers with too much time making fake footprints." I wanted to believe that. It was the rational explanation, the kind that fits neatly into a report. But those prints, the depth, the shape, the way the toes splayed, something about them raised the hairs on my neck. "Let's get some samples of this mud," I said, "and call Public Works about getting this sealed up again properly." By afternoon, word had spread through town about the strange footprints. Mason's Creek is small, just under 2,000 people then, and news travels quick. By sunset, I'd fielded calls from a dozen concerned citizens and shooed away twice as many curious onlookers from the well site. Public Works promised they'd have a crew out the next morning to reseal the well. In the meantime, I strung police tape around the perimeter and stationed Mills there for the night shift. "Call me if anything happens," I told him. "Anything at all." He nodded, settling into the front seat of his cruiser with a thermos of coffee and a paperback western. The sun was setting behind the pine trees that edged the property, casting long shadows across the well's cracked surface. I should have stayed. Something in my gut told me to stay. But I'd been awake for nearly 40 hours by then, and my bed was calling. Sometimes I wonder how different things might have been if I'd listened to that feeling. If I'd been there when darkness fell. Mills called at 3:17 a.m. I fumbled for the phone, dragging myself from a dream about walking through muddy water. "Sheriff?" His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the edge of panic underneath. "I think you need to come out here." "What is it?" A pause. The sound of him swallowing. There's water coming up through the crack in the well cap. A lot of it. And I keep hearing something. Like breathing." I was dressed and in the cruiser within 5 minutes, tearing down empty streets slick with overnight dew. As I turned onto the county road leading to the well site, my headlights caught something that made me brake hard. Footprints. Dozens of them, all coming from the direction of the well. Dark mud glistened on the asphalt. I followed them slowly, the cruiser's tires rolling between the parallel lines of prints. They all headed the same direction, toward town. When I reached the well, Mills was standing beside his cruiser, flashlight in one hand, revolver in the other. His face was bone white in the headlights. "It started about 20 minutes ago," he said as I approached, voice barely above a whisper. "First just a trickle, then more and more. Listen." We stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness. At first, I heard nothing but the rustle of pine needles in the light breeze. Then it came, a soft, rhythmic sound from within the well. In and out. In and out. Like something large breathing slowly in a confined space. "Jesus," I muttered. The concrete cap was now covered by a thin sheet of water that seemed to pulse slightly with each breath. It spilled over the edges, dark and gleaming in the flashlight beam. "I called Public Works," Mills said. "Got the night watchman. He's waking up the crew, but it'll be at least an hour before they get here." I nodded, trying to think through the fog of exhaustion and rising unease. "We need to block off all roads leading from here into town. Those footprints," Mills nodded, "all headed toward Mason's Creek. Different patterns too, not just the same ones from yesterday. Like there's more than one, whatever it is." I raised my radio to call in the other 2 deputies on my force when we both heard it. A sound from down the road, from town. A scream, distant but clear in the still night air. We were back in our cruisers in seconds, racing toward Mason's Creek, leaving the breathing well behind us. The footprints on the road multiplied as we neared town, dozens of muddy tracks converging and separating, all made by feet that weren't quite right. The scream had come from the east side of town, near the cluster of small homes where most of the mill workers lived. As we turned onto Birch Street, we saw her, Sarah Guthrie, standing in her front yard in the nightgown, hands pressed to her mouth. I was out of the car before it fully stopped. "Sarah? What happened?" She didn't look at me, just kept staring at her front door, which stood open, lights spilling onto the porch. "It came in the house," she whispered. "It came in while we were sleeping." Muddy footprints led up her front steps and into the house. "Stay with her," I told Mills, drawing my weapon. "Call an ambulance." The Guthrie house was small, just 4 rooms. The footprints tracked through the living room, down the short hallway. They entered the master bedroom, where the covers were thrown back on an empty bed, then continued to the bathroom. The bathroom door was closed. Water seeped out from underneath, not clear but dark and thick with sediment. The same mud that made the footprints. I called out, "Police! Is anyone in there?" Nothing. Hard hammering, I tried the knob. Locked. I stepped back and kicked once, twice. The cheap door splintered around the lock and swung open. Water immediately surged out around my feet, several inches deep. The bathtub was overflowing, faucets running full blast. The water wasn't from the town supply. It was dark, silted, smelling of minerals and something else, something organic and old. Robert Guthrie lay in the tub, fully clothed in soaked pajamas. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. His skin had a grayish cast in the harsh bathroom light. He wasn't breathing. I waded to the tub, reaching to check for a pulse I already knew wouldn't be there. As my fingers touched his neck, his head turned, not in the way of a living person, but as if something beneath the skin was shifting, rearranging. His mouth opened, and dark water spilled out between his lips. I stumbled back, nearly falling in the water that now reached mid-calf. Robert's body began to twitch, limbs jerking in uncoordinated movements. Then, impossibly, he sat up. Water poured from his mouth, his nose, his ears, not forcing its way out, but as if he was mostly liquid inside. His eyes remained fixed and glassy, seeing nothing. He stood, water cascading from his waterlogged clothes. I raised my gun, though I had no idea what good it would do. "Robert? Can you hear me?" No response. Just that blank stare, water still trickling from the corners of his mouth. He took a step toward me, then another. His movements were stiff, like a marionette operated by an unskilled puppeteer. I backed into the hallway. "Stop right there, Robert." He kept coming. I fired a warning shot into the ceiling. He didn't flinch, didn't react at all. In the distance, I could hear sirens. The ambulance Mills had called, or maybe backup from the county sheriff's office. They wouldn't get here in time. Robert lurched forward suddenly, hands outstretched. I fired twice, center mass, just as they taught me at the academy decades ago. The bullets punched through his sodden pajama shirt. Dark water spurted from the wounds, but he didn't fall. Didn't even slow down. His hands closed around my throat, ice cold and unnaturally strong. Up close, I could see that his eyes weren't just glassy. They were cloudy, the irises almost white. Like they'd been soaking in water for hours. I struggled, trying to break his grip, but it was like fighting against iron bands. My vision began to blur at the edges. In desperation, I brought my gun up under his chin and fired again. His head snapped back. Water, not blood, sprayed across the wall behind him. His grip loosened just enough for me to wrench free and stumble backward down the hall. Robert stood motionless for a moment, water dripping steadily from the new hole beneath his jaw. Then he collapsed, folding in on himself like a puppet with cut strings. More water gushed from the wounds, soaking into the carpet. Within seconds, what remained looked less like a human body and more like a pile of sodden clothing. By the time the ambulance arrived, I was sitting on the Guthrie's front porch, gun still in hand, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I gave a statement that mentioned an attack, self-defense, shock. I didn't mention how Robert's body had seemed to be more water than flesh. How he'd kept coming after bullets to the chest. How, as he gripped my throat, I'd heard that same rhythmic breathing I'd noticed at the well, coming from somewhere inside him. Sarah Guthrie couldn't tell us much. She'd woken to the sound of water running, found her husband gone from bed. When she went to check the bathroom, she saw something that wasn't quite Robert anymore moving inside. She ran. The medical examiner later ruled Robert's death as drowning, though he couldn't explain how a man had drowned in his own bathtub while fully clothed, or why the water in his lungs contained sediment and microfauna matching samples from the Mason well, a well that was supposedly sealed and dry until the storm hit. By the time I left the Guthrie house that morning, Public Works had arrived at the well with cement trucks and equipment. They worked through the day, pouring a new seal twice as thick as the original. By sunset, the well was sealed again, the breathing sound silenced beneath tons of concrete and steel reinforcement. But it wasn't over. Over the next week, 3 more people died in Mason's Creek. All drownings. All in places where they shouldn't have been able to drown. Frank Willis, found in a puddle on his garage floor that wasn't deep enough to submerge his face. Maria Cortez, discovered in her garden after a light rain, her lungs full of muddy water. Peter Hannigan, the high school science teacher, who apparently drowned in the teacher's lounge during his lunch break, though the only water nearby was a half-empty coffee cup. Each time, I found the same muddy footprints leading to the scene. Each time, they originated from a different source of water, a drainage ditch, a decorative pond, once even from a washing machine that had flooded a basement. Whatever had been in the well was finding other ways into our town. I consulted historians, geologists, even a folklore professor from the state university. None had answers, though the folklorists mentioned old legends about water walkers, spirits that could travel through connected bodies of water like humans use roads. In the old stories, she told me over the phone, her voice crackling with static, they were said to be the souls of those who died by drowning, unable to rest, trying to pull others down to join them. How do you stop them? I asked. A long pause. The stories don't usually have happy endings, Sheriff. After the 7th drowning, old Calvin Metz, found floating face down in his bird bath, I made a decision. We would trace the water. All of it. Every pipe, every drain, every natural spring and creek in the county. Find how it all connected, and where it led. It took 3 days of poring over municipal records, geological surveys, and water table maps. Mills and my other deputies thought I'd lost my mind, but they helped anyway. And eventually, we found it, the connection. The groundwater beneath Mason's Creek formed a rough circular pattern, all flowing toward a central point, the Mason Well. The well hadn't been dug by chance. It sat directly above the spot where all the underground streams converged, like spokes on a wheel. And it went deep, far deeper than the town records indicated. The original survey from 1847 showed the well reaching a depth of 60 feet. But a geological survey from 1962, conducted after the children died but before the well was sealed, indicated something different. The actual shaft continued past where Elijah Mason had stopped digging, opening into a natural cavern system that extended downward at least another 100 feet. The survey team had sent down cameras, recorded depth measurements, collected water samples. Their findings were inconclusive, though they noted unusual mineral deposits and unexplained acoustic phenomena from the deeper sections. The reports were filed away and forgotten after the well was sealed. But they'd found something else, something that made my blood run cold when I read it. At the lowest point they could measure, where their equipment couldn't go any further due to water pressure, they detected movement. Regular, rhythmic displacement of water, like massive lungs drawing breath. Whatever was down there had been breathing for a long, long time. I took the reports home that night, spreading them across my kitchen table along with maps of the town's water system. As I cross-referenced documents, I began to see the pattern. The drownings weren't random. They formed a rough circle around the well, each one a little further out than the last. Like ripples spreading from a central point. Or like something marking territory. I was still awake at 3 a.m. when I heard it, the sound of water running in my bathroom. Not the usual rush of pipes in an old house, but steady, deliberate. I hadn't turned on any faucets. My service weapon was on the kitchen table. I picked it up, moving silently down the hallway toward the bathroom door, which stood slightly ajar. Steam curled out into the hall, warm and damp against my face. I nudged the door open with my foot. The shower was running, hot water filling the small room with steam. The curtain was drawn closed, a shadow visible behind the plastic sheet, a human silhouette unmoving. "Police," I called, voice steadier than I felt. "Step out now." No response. The figure didn't move. With my gun trained on the shower, I reached for the curtain and yanked it back. There was no one there. Just water streaming down, disappearing down the drain. But as I watched, the water began to move strangely, defying gravity. Droplets flowed upward, gathering in midair, forming the vague suggestion of a human shape, arms, legs, a featureless head. Water suspended in the shape of a person, held together by nothing I could understand. It reached for me with an arm made of water droplets, suspended impossibly in air. I fired twice through its midsection. The bullets passed through harmlessly, spattering against the tile wall behind. The water shape paused, as if curious, then continued its advance. I backed out of the bathroom, slammed the door shut, and ran. Through the kitchen, out the back door, across my yard to the cruiser parked in the driveway. In my rearview mirror as I sped away, I could see water pouring from under my front door, forming a puddle that slowly, deliberately, began to take shape again. I drove straight to the well. I don't know why, instinct maybe, or some half-formed plan to confront whatever was happening at its source. The new concrete cap gleamed dully in my headlights as I pulled up, solid and undisturbed. Yet somehow, I knew it wasn't enough. What lay beneath was older than concrete and rebar, older perhaps than the town itself. It had been patient before. It could be patient again. As I sat in my cruiser, watching the sealed well, a realization slowly formed. The drownings, the water that moved like it was alive, the breathing sound from deep below, they were all expressions of something trying to communicate, trying to spread. The well wasn't just a passage to groundwater. It was a door, accidentally opened by the storm, to something that had been waiting underneath Mason's Creek since before there was a Mason's Creek. And it was still spreading, moving through our water systems, taking what it needed. I thought of the water droplets forming a human shape in my shower, of Robert Guthrie's body moving after death, full of well water. It was learning, adapting, using us. I made my decision before dawn. By noon, I'd convinced the mayor to call an emergency town meeting. By evening, the evacuation order was given. Within 48 hours, Mason's Creek was empty of people, a hastily declared water contamination emergency. The official reason? Most folks left with whatever they could pack in their cars, believing they'd be back in a few days once the water was safe again. They scattered to relatives' homes, to motels in neighboring counties, to emergency shelters set up by the Red Cross. They never came back. None of us did. The official report blamed chemical seepage from an old industrial site north of town, claiming the groundwater had been contaminated with compounds that could cause hallucinations, paranoia, and psychosis. The drownings were attributed to mass hysteria, to accidents exacerbated by panic. The town was declared uninhabitable, too costly to clean up. The government offered settlements, relocation assistance. Life moved on. But I know the truth. I dream about it still, dark water rising, taking shape, reaching out. Breathing. Always breathing. They buried the well under tons of concrete and soil, built a chain-link fence around the entire area, posted signs warning of contamination, of unstable ground. Physical barriers to keep people away from a danger they'd decided isn't real. But sometimes, after heavy rains, muddy footprints still appear outside the fence. Always facing outward. Always in pairs, evenly spaced, leading away toward wherever water flows. I'm an old man now. The dreams come more frequently, water filling my bedroom, rising to my chin while I lie paralyzed. Sometimes I hear that breathing, sink my own lungs to its rhythm without meaning to. Sometimes I taste mud in the back of my throat when I wake. I've told this story now. Maybe that's enough. Maybe putting it on paper will let me rest without dreaming of dark water and footprints that shouldn't exist. Or maybe, by writing this down, I've just opened another way for it to spread. By dawn, the water always looks clean again. But the footprints remain, for those who know to look for them. I've heard wolves before. This wasn't a wolf. That's what I kept telling myself that first night in April, when the sound came drifting across the meadow beyond Stillwater Creek. I was 68 then, just 3 months from retirement after serving Gresham County for 43 years. A man hears things in that time. Things that stay with you. I was doing my last rounds that night, more out of habit than necessity. Gresham ain't the kind of place that needs much policing after midnight. Most folks are tucked in by 10, except for the occasional teenager thinking they're being rebellious by smoking behind the Dyer's General Store, or Old Man Calloway having one too many at the Rusty Nail. The digital clock on my dashboard read 3:06 a.m. when I pulled over at the edge of town, where the paved road gives way to gravel and eventually dirt. I always liked to stop there, look out over the valley and the dark mass of pines that crowded the horizon like mourners at a funeral. The moon that night was thin as a paper cut, barely enough to outline the trees against the star-filled sky. Then I heard it. At first, I thought someone had left their radio on. It was that kind of sound, almost human but stretched wrong. Like someone had recorded a man screaming and then played it backward and slowed it down. It wasn't loud, but it carried. That's what struck me. How it seemed to slide through the air like it was looking for ears to find. I checked my watch, 3:07 a.m. For a long minute I sat there, my hand frozen on the key in the ignition. The sound came again, longer this time, rising and falling in a way that made my skin feel 2 sizes too small. It echoed across the valley, bouncing between the hills until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then it stopped. The silence that followed felt wrong somehow, like the world was holding its breath. I've been in these woods my whole life. I know what belongs and what doesn't. And that sound didn't belong. I didn't think much of it then. Strange noises happen in rural places. Maybe it was some farmer's equipment gone haywire or a wild animal in distress. I made a note in my log and finished my shift. Went home to Martha, who was already up making coffee like she always did, no matter how many times I told her sleep was more important than having a fresh pot waiting for me. "Anything interesting?" she asked, like she had every morning for 40 years. "Just the usual," I said. And at the time, I believed it. A week passed. Friday rolled around again, and I found myself back at that same spot. I hadn't planned it that way. Wasn't even thinking about the sound from the week before. But something pulled me there, the way a half-remembered dream sometimes tugs at you throughout the day. The dashboard clock read 3:05 a.m. I shut off the engine and rolled down the window. The night was cooler than the last, the kind of spring chill that reminds you winter isn't far behind in the rearview mirror. The trees stood silent, and for a moment I felt foolish sitting there, waiting for, what, exactly? At 3:07 a.m., it came again. This time, I was ready for it. I had my tape recorder out, the old one I'd used for witness statements since the 90s. The howl started the same way, that wrong-sounding human note that made my molars ache. But there was something else in it this time. Words, maybe? Or the suggestion of words. Like if you could just listen hard enough, you might understand what it was trying to say. When it was over, I rewound the tape and played it back. Nothing. Just static and the sound of my own breathing. I tried again, making sure the volume was up. Still nothing. That's when the first real chill went through me. Not from the sound itself, but from its absence on the tape. Technology and I have never been friends, but I knew how to work a damn recorder. I checked the batteries, tried again. Made a test recording of my own voice, which played back just fine. But the howl? It was like it had never happened. I drove home with the windows up that night. "Sheriff Holloway? Got a minute?" It was Tuesday afternoon when Sarah Winters from the library poked her head into my office. Sarah was in her 50s, hair gone gray early, with glasses that magnified her eyes like she was perpetually surprised. She'd been running the Gresham County Library since before I took office. "Always time for you, Sarah. What can I do you for?" She sat down, placing a stack of yellow newspaper clippings on my desk. You mentioned something at the town council meeting about a strange noise out by Stillwater Creek. I hadn't realized I'd brought it up. The town council meetings were usually about parking disputes and zoning regulations. I must have mentioned it in passing. Just curious about it, I said, keeping my voice casual. Probably just some animal. Sarah pushed the clippings toward me. Maybe. But I thought you might find these interesting. The top clipping was from the Gresham Gazette, dated May 2nd, 1974. The headline read, "Strange Sounds Reported Near Stillwater Creek." The article described unearthly howling, heard by several residents during the early morning hours. "There's more," Sarah said, watching my face as I flipped through the stack. Similar reports from 1925, 1876, and 1827, all describing the same phenomenon. All in early spring. All near Stillwater Creek. "Where did you find these?" I asked, my throat suddenly dry. "County archives. I've been digitizing the old newspapers. These stories caught my attention because they appear exactly 49 years apart. To the day." She paused. "Last Friday was exactly 49 years since the 1974 incident." The office felt colder somehow, despite the afternoon sun streaming through the blinds. "Is there anything else in the articles? Anything about what it might be?" Sarah shook her head. "Just reports of the sound." "But," she hesitated, "in the oldest account, from 1827, there's mention of 3 people who went missing that spring. A trapper and 2 members of a survey party. They were never found." I thanked Sarah, told her I'd look into it. After she left, I spread the clippings across my desk and stared at them until the words blurred together. 49 years. Like clockwork. Some things you can explain away. Coincidence. Folklore. People hearing what they expect to hear because of stories passed down. But those missing persons? That was something concrete. Something I could investigate. That afternoon, I pulled the county's missing persons files for the spring months of 1974, 1925, and 1876. In 1974, a hiker vanished without a trace in late April. In 1925, 2 children from a farm near the creek were reported missing in early May. And in 1876, a census taker disappeared while working in the area. I sat back in my chair, the weight of these patterns settling on my shoulders like a heavy coat. Something was out there. Something with patience. That Friday, I was back at the same spot by Stillwater Creek. This time, I wasn't alone. Deputy Mercer sat in the passenger seat, nervous energy radiating off him like heat from an engine. He was young, maybe 30, with the kind of eagerness that hadn't yet been worn down by years of routine and paperwork. "So we're just waiting?" he asked, checking his watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. "For now," I said, eyes fixed on the tree line. I hadn't told him everything. Just that I was investigating strange noises reported in the area. No need to mention the patterns Sarah had uncovered, or the missing persons. Not yet. The dashboard clock clicked over to 3:07 a.m. Nothing. We sat in silence, the only sound the occasional creak of the car settling or Mercer shifting in his seat. Minutes ticked by. 3:10, 3:15, 3:20. "Maybe whatever it was moved on," Mercer suggested, clearly eager to get back to town. I was about to agree when I saw it. Just a flicker at first, like heat shimmer rising from asphalt on a hot day. A distortion at the edge of the tree line, about 50 yards from where we were parked. "You see that?" I whispered, pointing. Mercer squinted. "See what?" The shimmer moved, drifting slowly along the edge of the trees. It was almost transparent, but there was substance to it. A shape that suggested shoulders, a head, limbs that were too long and jointed in places they shouldn't be. And then it howled. This time, the sound hit me like a physical force. My ears popped, and I felt a pressure in my chest like being too deep underwater. Beside me, Mercer went rigid, his face draining of color. "Jesus Christ," he breathed. "What the hell is that?" So he heard it too. It wasn't just in my head. The howl lasted longer this time, nearly 30 seconds of that rising, falling wail that seemed to contain words just beyond understanding. When it finally stopped, the silence felt like a blessing. The shimmer at the tree-line was gone. Mercer was trembling, his hand hovering near his service weapon. "Sheriff, I don't." "It's okay," I said, though it wasn't. Nothing about this was okay. "Let's head back to town." As I started the car, my radio crackled to life. The sound made both of us jump. It was the night dispatcher, her voice tight with concern. "Sheriff? We've got a situation at the Keller place. Mr. Keller says his son didn't come home tonight. The boy went camping with friends by Stillwater Creek." My eyes met Mercer's. The fear I saw there mirrored my own. The search for Justin Keller lasted 3 days. We found his campsite intact, tent still pitched, sleeping bag unrolled inside. His friends said he'd gone to gather more firewood just after dark and never returned. No signs of struggle. No tracks leading away from the camp. It was as if he had simply stepped between the trees and ceased to exist. Just like the others. Every 49 years. I didn't share this thought with the search parties or the boy's parents. What good would it do? Instead, I focused on the search, covering every inch of those woods, dragging the creek, bringing in dogs from the county over. Nothing. By the 4th day, the search was scaled back. By the end of the week, it was just me, walking the same paths, looking for something, anything, that might explain what happened. It was during one of these solitary searches that I found the cave. It wasn't easy to spot. Just a dark crack in a rocky hillside, partially hidden by a fall of debris and overgrown with vines. I might have walked past it a dozen times during the search without noticing. This time, though, something caught my eye. A glint of metal in the underbrush near the entrance. Justin Keller's flashlight. My heart pounding, I called it in, requesting backup before investigating further. But as I stood there waiting, staring at that dark opening, I felt a pull. Like the cave was calling to me. Whispering my name in a voice too low to hear. Protocol said wait. 43 years of experience said wait. I went in anyway. The entrance was tight, forcing me to turn sideways and shuffle through. After about 10 feet, the passage widened enough for me to stand upright and switch on my own flashlight. The beam cut through darkness thick as tar, revealing a tunnel that sloped gently downward. The air inside was different. Stagnant, yes, but with an underlying smell I couldn't place. Something mineral and organic at the same time, like old blood mixed with wet stone. The walls were smooth in places, as if worn down by water or something else. I followed the tunnel for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The sound of my breathing and footsteps seemed unnaturally loud, bouncing off the walls and coming back wrong somehow. Distorted. Then the tunnel opened into a chamber. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the far side or the ceiling. It was vast, much larger than seemed possible given the size of the hill above. The floor sloped down toward the center, where a pool of black water lay still as glass. And all around the chamber, carved into the walls, were symbols. They weren't like anything I'd ever seen. Not Native American pictographs or any kind of writing I recognized. They seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, changing shape in my peripheral vision. Some looked almost like stick figures, but bent at impossible angles. Others resembled stars or geometrical patterns that hurt my eyes if I stared too long. As I moved closer to one wall, my flashlight beam caught something else. Something white against the dark stone. Bones. Human bones. Scattered and broken, some bleached with age, others fresher. Among them, I saw a blue fabric that looked horribly like the jacket Justin Keller had been wearing when he disappeared. My radio crackled, making me jump. Deputy Mercer's voice came through, distorted with static. "Sheriff? You copy? We're at your location but don't see you. Where exactly is this cave?" I raised the radio to respond, but stopped. The surface of the pool had begun to ripple. Small waves spreading outward from the center, though nothing had disturbed it. And then, rising from the water, came the shimmer. It was clearer here, in this place. I could make out a shape that was vaguely humanoid but wrong in fundamental ways. Too tall, with limbs that bent at odd angles. Its head was elongated, featuring no discernible face, just a dark void where features should be. It didn't move toward me. It didn't need to. I could feel its attention like a physical weight, pressing against my mind. And I understood, with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins, what was happening. What had always been happening, every 49 years. It was feeding. Not on bodies, but on fear. On the terror of its victims in their final moments. On the anguish of those left behind to search and wonder. On the quiet dread that settled over the town like a shroud. I don't know how long I stood there, locked in silent communion with the thing from the pool. Seconds? Minutes? Time seemed meaningless in that place. My radio crackled again. "Sheriff? Do you copy?" The sound broke whatever hold the creature had on me. I backed away, eyes still fixed on the shimmering form. It made no move to follow, but I felt its disappointment, amusement, like it knew something I didn't. Like it knew I'd be back. I stumbled out of the cave into the fading afternoon light, finding Mercer and 2 other deputies searching the hillside. They said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I didn't correct them. We sealed off the cave entrance that day. Concrete and heavy steel bars. I filed a report stating we'd found evidence of Justin Keller's presence but no body. I didn't mention the other bones. Or the symbols. Or the thing in the pool. Some truths are too heavy to share. That was 48 years ago. I retired the next month, as planned. Moved to Arizona with Martha, far from Stillwater Creek and its secrets. I followed the news from Gresham County over the years. No more disappearances. No more reports of strange howling. But I know better than to think it's over. Next spring will mark 49 years since I stood in that chamber. Since I looked upon something ancient and hungry and felt it look back into me. The concrete will have cracked by now. The steel rusted. Natural processes breaking down man's flimsy barriers, as they always do. Sometimes, in my dreams, I hear it. That howling that isn't quite a wolf, that almost has words. It's calling me back to Gresham County. Back to the cave. Back to finish what started that night by Stillwater Creek. I won't go, of course. I'm an old man now, with brittle bones and a heart that skips beats when it shouldn't. I've told myself that for years, even as I've gathered notes, maps, old files copied before I left. Even as I've reached out to contacts in Gresham, asking subtle questions about strange noises or missing hikers. But last night, I woke at exactly 3:07 a.m. The bedroom was cold despite the desert heat outside. And for just a moment, before my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw a shimmer at the foot of my bed. I've heard wolves before. This wasn't a wolf. And it's found me. We lost an hour last night. Trouble is, no one remembers it. That's what Margaret Wilcox said when she came into my office on that bright Tuesday morning in May. I remember it being unusually warm, the kind of early summer heat that makes everything shimmer and dance before your eyes. The old ceiling fan in my office clicked with each rotation, fighting a losing battle against the sticky air. "Sheriff Tanner," she said, her voice thin and reedy, like it had been stretched across too many years. "Something happened last night." The clocks stopped. All of them. For exactly 1 hour. I'd known Margaret for 43 years. She'd been the librarian at Millhaven Public since before I pinned on this badge. Never married. Never left town. Never once called the sheriff's office with a complaint or concern. Until today. "Have a seat, Margaret," I said, gesturing to the wooden chair across from my desk. It creaked under her slight weight as she perched on the edge, back straight as a ruler, just like she'd taught generations of children to sit while reading. "It happened at 2:17, she continued, placing her wristwatch on my desk with precise, measured movements. "I woke up and it was stuck. And then I noticed my bedside clock and the kitchen clock were both showing the same time. They started again at 3:17. I leaned back in my chair, letting the springs protest beneath me. Millhaven had always been quiet. Too quiet, some might say. The kind of place where folks leave their doors unlocked and newspapers pile up on porches when folks go on vacation. In 40 years as sheriff, I'd handled domestic disputes, occasional drunk drivers, and one particularly nasty case of embezzlement at the credit union. But stop clocks? That was new. Could have been a power surge, I offered, though something in her eyes told me she'd already considered and dismissed that explanation. Digital clocks, yes. Not mechanical ones. Not wristwatches. Her fingers tapped a nervous rhythm on my desk. And Sheriff, I can't remember what I was doing during that hour. I can't access it. Like there's a hole in my memory. The telephone rang then, shrill and insistent. My deputy, Kevin, young enough to be my grandson and twice as eager, picked it up at the front desk. I heard his voice rise in confusion before he appeared in my doorway, a peculiar expression on his face. Sheriff, we've had 7 calls in the last 20 minutes. All reporting the same thing. The back of my neck prickled, the way it always does when something isn't right. When the natural order of things has been disturbed. Stop clocks? I asked, already knowing the answer. Kevin nodded, a thin sheen of sweat visible on his upper lip. And memory gaps. All at 2:17 this morning. Lasting exactly 1 hour. Margaret's eyes met mine across the desk, and I saw something I hadn't seen in decades of law enforcement. The raw, naked fear of someone who's glimpsed something that shouldn't exist in our orderly world. By noon, we'd received 43 identical reports. By mid-afternoon, that number had climbed to 117. Every single person in Millhaven who'd been awake at 2:17 a.m. reported the same phenomenon, clock stopping, an hour vanishing from their memory. Those who'd been asleep reported unusual dreams, vivid images of empty streets, of standing in their front yards looking up at stars that seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. I'd been asleep myself. Or at least, I thought I had been. But something about the reports nagged at me, like a splinter under the skin that you can't quite reach. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, and a legal pad filled with notes that told me nothing. The old grandfather clock in my hallway, a wedding gift to my late wife and me, 52 years ago, ticked steadily, each sound like a footstep in an empty house. I found myself watching the second hand, tracking its movement with an intensity that surprised me. When the phone rang, I nearly knocked over my coffee reaching for it. Sheriff? The voice belonged to Dr. Eleanor Phillips, who ran the small medical clinic on Maple Street. "I think you should come down here. There's something you need to see." The clinic was lit up like Christmas when I arrived, every window blazing with fluorescent light that spilled onto the dark street outside. Dr. Phillips met me at the door, her normally composed face tight with concern. "I've been running tests all day," she said without preamble, leading me down the hallway to her office. "Brain scans on those who reported memory loss. And I found something unusual." She gestured for me to sit, then turned her computer monitor so I could see it. On the screen was what I assumed to be a brain scan, with several areas highlighted in bright red. "This is Mrs. Carpenter's brain. She was one of the first to report memory loss. These red areas show unusual activity, something I've never seen before in 20 years of practice." I leaned closer, though the images meant nothing to my untrained eye. "What kind of activity?" Dr. Phillips hesitated, fingers hovering over her keyboard. "That's just it, Sheriff. It's not like anything in the medical literature. The closest comparison would be, well, it almost resembles patterns seen in certain parasitic infections, but magnified 100-fold. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "Are you saying something infected these people's brains during that missing hour?" She shook her head quickly. "I'm not saying that at all. There's no physical pathogen I can detect. It's more like an impression. Like when you press your hand into clay and remove it. Something was there, interacting with their neural pathways. And then it was gone." Outside the window, a moth repeatedly threw itself against the glass, drawn to the light within. I watched its futile efforts, thinking about the fragility of the human mind, how easily it can be manipulated, influenced, altered. "How many people have you tested?" I asked. 17 so far. All with identical results." She leaned back in her chair, running a hand through her graying hair. "And there's one more thing, Sheriff. Everyone I've tested has been experiencing the same recurring thought. A location." My skin tightened. "What location?" "The old Blackwood property. Out by the lake." The Blackwood place had been abandoned for nearly 30 years, ever since Old Man Blackwood's son had drowned in the lake behind the house. The property had fallen into disrepair, the subject of local ghost stories and teenage dares. No one had lived there since the tragedy, and the town council had been arguing about demolishing it for as long as I could remember. "Why there?" I murmured, more to myself than to Dr. Phillips. "I don't know. But it's pronounced enough that I've had 3 patients independently ask me if I knew anything about recent activity at the property." I left the clinic with more questions than answers, driving through the quiet streets of Millhaven with my windows down. The night air carried the scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass, deceptively normal. Houses stood dark and quiet, most residents having gone to bed early after their disturbed night. Almost without conscious decision, I found myself turning onto Lake Road, the narrow, winding path that led to the Blackwood property. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to navigate by without headlights. I killed the engine about a quarter-mile from the house and continued on foot, an old habit from my early days as a deputy when stealth sometimes mattered more than authority. The Blackwood house loomed against the night sky, a jagged silhouette of Victorian gables and crumbling chimneys. Moonlight glinted off broken windows, like a face with too many eyes watching my approach. The front porch sagged in the middle, steps long rotted away. Behind the house, I could just make out the gleam of the lake's surface, unnaturally still in the windless night. I played my flashlight over the ground as I approached, noticing something odd almost immediately. Despite years of abandonment, there was a clear path through the overgrown grass, not just one set of footprints, but many, all recent. Someone had been here. A lot of someones. The front door hung partially open, swollen with moisture and unable to close properly in its frame. I hesitated on what remained of the porch, a lifetime of law enforcement instincts warring with the deeper, more primal feeling of warning. "Hello?" I called out, hearing my voice bounce hollowly through the empty structure. "Sheriff's Department." No response came except the distant hoot of an owl somewhere in the woods. I pushed the door open wider with the barrel of my flashlight, wincing at the screech of rusted hinges. The interior smelled of mold and decay and something else, something mineral and sharp that reminded me of ozone after a lightning strike. My flashlight beam caught dust motes swirling in the air, disturbed by my entrance, but oddly geometric in their movements, almost as if they were arranging themselves in patterns just beyond my comprehension. The entrance hall opened onto what had once been a grand living room. Sheets draped over furniture created lumpy, ghostly shapes. The floorboards creaked beneath my weight, but held. Against the far wall stood a massive stone fireplace, its mantel still intact despite the years of neglect. And on that mantel sat something that didn't belong, something that gleamed dully in my flashlight beam. I approached cautiously, ears straining for any sound other than my own breathing and footsteps. When I was close enough to make out the object, I felt that prickling sensation again, stronger now, raising goosebumps along my arms. It was a clock. An antique brass clock with Roman numerals and delicate, ornate hands. And unlike everything else in the abandoned house, it was free of dust, gleaming as if recently polished. Its hands were frozen at 2:17. As I stared at the clock, something shifted in my perception. The room seemed to tilt slightly, the shadows deepening in the corners. And with that shift came a memory, or perhaps the ghost of one, floating to the surface of my mind. I had been awake at 2:17 last night. I remembered sitting up in bed, driven by some nameless urgency. I remembered looking at my bedside clock, watching as the digital numbers froze mid-change. And I remembered something else, standing at my bedroom window, looking out at a street filled with my neighbors, all walking silently, purposefully in the same direction. Toward the lake. Toward the Blackwood house. My flashlight flickered, the beam dimming momentarily before strengthening again. In that brief darkness, I thought I heard something move behind me, the whisper of fabric, the soft scuff of a footstep. I whirled around, hard hammering, but the beam illuminated only empty space and dust. "Anyone there?" My voice sounded thin and unconvincing, even to my own ears. I turned back to the clock, an inexplicable urge rising within me to touch it, to feel its cold brass against my skin. My hand was halfway extended before I caught myself, curling my fingers into a fist and pulling back. Instead, I swept my light around the room again, noticing details I'd missed in my initial inspection. The sheets covering the furniture weren't randomly arranged as I'd first thought. They formed a loose circle in the center of the room. And on the hardwood floor within that circle, something had been drawn, a complex geometric pattern of interlocking circles and lines, rendered in what looked like white chalk. I knelt to examine it more closely, careful not to touch any part of the design. It wasn't like any symbol I recognized, not religious, not gang-related, nothing I'd encountered in 4 decades of law enforcement. Yet it stirred something in my memory, something just beyond reach. A floorboard creaked upstairs, the sound impossibly loud in the silent house. I straightened quickly, drawing my service weapon in a motion that had become instinct over the years. "Sheriff's Department," I called again, with more authority this time. "Identify yourself." Silence answered me, but it was a different quality of silence now, expectant, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Against every instinct for self-preservation, I found myself moving toward the staircase that curved up from the entryway. The steps protested beneath my weight, but seemed solid enough, I ascended slowly, gun in one hand, flashlight in the other, scanning the upper landing as it came into view. A long hallway stretched before me, doors standing open on either side. At the far end, one door remained closed. As I watched, a thin line of light appeared beneath it, flickering like candlelight. I moved down the hall, checking each room as I passed. Empty, all of them, with peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceilings. No furniture, no signs of recent occupation. Nothing but dust and the lingering smell of that strange, electric scent. When I reached the closed door, I paused, listening. No sound came from within, not even the natural creaks and settling noises of an old house. I tried the knob, finding it surprisingly warm to the touch, as if someone had been gripping it moments before. It turned easily in my hand. The room beyond was empty like all the others, but with one crucial difference. On the floor, arranged in the same pattern I'd seen downstairs, were 17 candles, their flames perfectly still in the windless air. And in the center of the circle they formed lay a small, leather-bound book, its cover unmarked except for a single symbol that matched the chalk drawing below. I should have called for backup. Should have secured the scene and waited for daylight. Should have done anything except what I actually did, which was to step into that circle of unnatural light and pick up the book. Its cover was warm, like something alive. When I opened it, the pages were filled with handwritten text in an alphabet I didn't recognize, flowing, curved symbols that seemed to shift and change as I tried to focus on them. All except for one page, near the middle, where a single paragraph had been written in English. Time is not linear. It pulls and eddies. Sometimes it can be borrowed, if one knows how to ask. But always with a price. Always with a witness. Below these words was a list of dates, stretching back decades. The most recent was yesterday's date, with the notation 2:17 a.m. to 3:17 a.m. beside it. As I stared at the page, the candles around me flickered in perfect unison, as if disturbed by a sudden breath. The hairs on the back of my neck rose, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was no longer alone in the room. I looked up slowly, my flashlight beam trembling slightly in my hand. Standing in the doorway was a figure, human in shape, but wrong somehow in a way I couldn't immediately identify. It took my brain a moment to process what I was seeing. A person composed not of flesh and bone, but of countless tiny points of light, like stars compressed into human form. Where the face should have been was only darkness, two deeper voids where eyes might be. My gun was in my hand before I consciously remembered drawing it. "Don't move," I ordered, voice surprisingly steady given the hammering of my heart. The figure tilted its head, an eerily human gesture from something so alien. When it spoke, the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You remember." The voice was neither male nor female, young nor old. It simply was, like the sound of wind or water. "Most do not." "Interesting." I kept my gun leveled, though some part of me doubted its effectiveness against whatever stood before me. "What are you? What happened last night?" The figure moved into the room, its motion too fluid, too smooth to be natural. The points of light that comprised its form flowed like water, maintaining the suggestion of a human shape without any of the awkwardness of actual human movement. "I am a collector," it said, stopping just outside the circle of candles. "Of time. Of experience. Of memory. You took an hour from everyone in town," I said, pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "Why?" The figure's head tilted again, those void-like eyes seeming to assess me. "Time is the most precious resource in your universe. More valuable than gold, than blood. We borrow it, when conditions are right. When the boundaries between realities grow thin." "Borrow?" My voice hardened. "You stole it." And people's memories. Borrowed, it repeated. It will be returned in its way, though perhaps not to those from whom it was taken. A chill ran through me as I considered the implications. The Blackwood place, why here? Places of tragedy thin the veil. The boy who drowned, his last moments stretched into eternity, creating a doorway. It gestured with an arm that momentarily dissolved into a swirl of lights before reforming. We have used it many times before. We will use it again. I thought of the dates listed in the book. Calculated backward. Every 17 years, I said softly. You come every 17 years. The figure made a sound like distant wind chimes. It took me a moment to realize it was laughing. You are more perceptive than most witnesses. Witnesses? To what? It moved closer, and I fought the urge to step back. To the harvest. Most forget. A few remember fragments. One always remembers completely. To observe. To record. To warn, perhaps, though you are never heeded. The implication struck me like a physical blow. I've seen you before. A sensation washed over me, not quite sound or touch or smell, but something between them all, a ripple of acknowledgement. 3 times now. As a child, watching from your window as we collected. As a young deputy, investigating strange reports the next day. And now. The witness must always be in authority. Must always be believed yet doubted. Memories cascaded through my mind, long buried but now breaking free. Being 7 years old, waking to see my parents walking trance-like down our street along with every other adult in town. Being 26, taking reports of mass amnesia and odd phenomena that my chief dismissed as mass hysteria. Each time, separated by exactly 17 years. What do you do with it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now. The time you take? We preserve it. Study it. Experience it. In our reality, time is a finite resource, nearly depleted. We harvest where we can. And the memories? Those void eyes seem to deepen. A necessary loss. The mind cannot process our presence without damage. We protect them in our way. I thought of Dr. Phillips' brain scans, those strange red patterns. You left traces this time. People are remembering more than before. The figure grew still, the points of light that formed it pulsing slower. Yes. The boundaries grow thinner with each crossing. Eventually, they will fail entirely. And then what happens? Then our realities will bleed together. It has happened before on other worlds. It rarely ends well for either side. I should have been terrified. Should have been running, or shooting, or doing anything except standing there having this impossible conversation. But all I felt was a profound weariness, the weight of knowledge no one should have to bear. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked? Because you remembered. Because the cycle is changing, and the next harvest will not be like the others. The figure moved to the window, gazing out at the lake behind the house. 17 years. Prepare your people, witness. The next time, some will not return. Before I could respond, every candle in the room extinguished simultaneously. In the sudden darkness, I fumbled with my flashlight, finally managing to turn it on. The room was empty. The book was gone. Even the chalk markings had vanished, as if they never existed. I searched the entire house, finding nothing but dust and decay. No evidence remained of what I'd seen, what I'd heard. Nothing but the memory, burning bright and terrible in my mind. The next morning, reports began to circulate through town. People remembered dreams of walking to the lake, of seeing strange lights, of watching as something moved among them, touching foreheads, collecting something unseen but precious from each person it encountered. Dr. Phillips called to tell me the red patterns in the brain scans were fading. Within 48 hours, they were gone completely. Within a week, most people had rationalized away their experiences. A power surge, a strange dream, a brief neurological phenomenon caused by something in the water or air. But I remembered, and I began to prepare. That was 16 years ago now. I've spent those years researching, documenting, trying to understand what's coming. I've left instructions with my deputies, though I doubt they believe the ramblings of their aging sheriff. Arrangements have been made for my retirement next month, though we all know I'll never leave Millhaven. I can't. I'm bound to this place now, to this cycle. The witness, the recorder, the warner of the unwary. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is full and the air carries that faint electric smell, I sit on my porch and look toward the lake. And sometimes, just at the edge of perception, I see points of light moving among the trees, watching, waiting, counting down the days until they return. 365 days remain. And I wonder, not for the first time, whether it wouldn't be better for everyone if, just once, the clocks never started again. Some things you see out there, you pretend you didn't. That's what my daddy used to say when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, trailing after him on his rounds through Millfield County. He'd been sheriff before me, and his daddy before him. 3 generations of Coltrane's wearing the star in this forgotten corner of America. I'm retired now. Been so for 12 years. My hands shake too much to hold a gun steady, and my knees protest when the barometer drops. But my mind is still sharp as a tack. Sharp enough to remember things I wish I could forget. I remember '86 particularly well. Not because it was when the mill finally closed down, taking 200 jobs with it, or because it was when my Martha started showing the first signs of the cancer that would take her. No, I remember that autumn because it was when Millfield County seemed to slip sideways, like a painting hung crooked on a wall. Just a little off, but enough that you notice and can't stop noticing. It started with old man Willard's hunting dogs. 3 well-trained blue ticks that never barked without cause. But on a Tuesday morning in late September, all 3 refused to leave their kennel. Willard tried everything, treats, commands, even a switch, but those dogs pressed themselves against the back wall, shivering like they'd been doused in ice water. Never seen nothing like it, Sheriff, Willard told me over coffee at Dot's Diner. His leathery face was deeply troubled, eyes darting to the window where the trees were beginning to turn. They ain't sick. They're scared of something out there. I didn't think much of it then. Animals get spooked. Weather changes. Life goes on. 3 days later, Meredith Calhoun from out by the old quarry called in. Her 6-year-old daughter wouldn't sleep in her room anymore. Said a tall man in black clothes stood outside her window at night, watching. Just watching. Never moving, never speaking. Just standing among the pines that bordered their property. Imagination, I assured Meredith. Kids that age, they get nightmares. But I drove out there anyway, parked my cruiser in their gravel driveway, and walked the perimeter. The pine trees stood like sentinels at the edge of their yard, branches swaying in a wind I couldn't feel on my skin. The ground beneath them was carpeted with needles so thick and soft it muffled my footsteps completely. No impressions, no broken branches, no sign anyone had been standing there. As I turned to head back to the house, something caught my eye. A patch of frost on the ground, roughly the size and shape of a man's footprint. Just one. In 70-degree weather. I knelt down, removed my glove, and touched it. The cold bit at my fingertips, and when I pulled my hand away, the skin was white, like early frostbite. I told Meredith I'd increase patrols in the area. What else could I say? That I'd found impossible frost in September? That the air around that footprint smelled like freshly turned soil, like something had just been buried? By early October, the calls were coming in regular. A figure in black seen moving between houses on Larkspur Lane. Something tall and thin crossing Miller's Road at dusk. A shadow that didn't match its owner slipping between the trees by the old church cemetery. Always at twilight. Always near the edge of the woods. Always leaving behind that unnatural cold. Doc Shepard stopped me outside the post office on a golden afternoon when the maples were at their peak. "Something's killing the birds, Harlan," he said without preamble. Doc had been the town's veterinarian for 30 years, and I'd never seen him look so troubled. "Found 6 cardinals and a dozen sparrows around my property this week. No wounds, no signs of disease. They just stopped. Like something scared them to death." He handed me a small paper bag. Inside was a cardinal, its red feathers still vibrant, its eyes open and clouded. When I touched it, the body was stiff but not with rigor mortis. It was cold. Cold like meat left too long in a freezer. That night I couldn't sleep. The windows in my bedroom were open to let in the autumn air, but around 3 in the morning, my breath began to fog in front of my face. The temperature in the room had dropped 20 degrees in seconds. From outside came a smell, damp earth and something else, something older. Like the inside of a tomb that hasn't been opened in centuries. I reached for my service weapon on the nightstand and moved to the window. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light across my backyard and the tree line beyond. Nothing moved. Not even a breeze stirred the branches. But there, at the edge where my mowed lawn met the underbrush, was a darkness that didn't belong. A darkness shaped like a man but too tall, too thin to be human. It didn't move, not even when I flicked on my porch light. It just stood there, a black cutout against the night. And though I couldn't see its face, wasn't even sure it had one, I knew it was looking at me. Watching. Waiting. My finger tightened on the trigger, but I didn't fire. What would bullets do to a shadow? By morning, it was gone, leaving nothing but a patch of dead grass where it had stood and that lingering smell of soil and decay. The next day, I called Bobby Tucker, who'd been my deputy for 15 years. Bobby was a good man, solid, not given to flights of fancy. "Something's wrong in this town," I told him over the radio. "I need you to check out the library. See if there's anything in the local history about unusual occurrences." "What kind of occurrences?" Bobby's voice crackled through the speaker. I hesitated. "The kind people don't talk about afterward." While Bobby did his research, I drove through town, noting changes so subtle most folks wouldn't notice. The usual groups of old-timers who sat outside the hardware store were gone, chairs empty and forgotten. Children were being kept indoors after school. And everywhere, people were hanging iron horseshoes over their doors, an old superstition in these parts, meant to keep evil at bay. Millfield was scared. Not the kind of fear that comes with crime waves or economic hardship, but something deeper, more primal. The fear of darkness, of the unknown. The kind of fear our ancestors felt before they discovered fire. Bobby called me that evening, his voice tight. "You need to see this, Sheriff." The library was housed in what used to be the town's first church, a stone building with arched windows and walls 3 feet thick. The research room in the basement still had the original foundation, rough-cut granite blocks with strange symbols carved into them at irregular intervals. Bobby had spread old leather-bound books and yellowing newspapers across a long oak table. His finger tapped a brittle page from 1834. "Every 40 years," he said without looking up. "Like clockwork. 1834, 1874, 1914, 1954. Now it's 1986. The article from 1834 was brief, the language formal and archaic. It described a darkness walking among the trees during the autumn months. Livestock found dead and stiff with cold. Children speaking of a thin minister who watched them from the forest edge. The piece from 1874 was longer, more detailed. 3 men had gone missing in October of that year. Their bodies were found months later when the snow melted, arranged in a perfect circle in a clearing, faces frozen in expressions of absolute terror. The ground beneath them was scorched black in a pattern, unnatural to behold. 1914. A photographer had captured something by accident. The newspaper had reprinted the image, grainy and faded with time. A town picnic, families smiling stiffly for the camera. But at the edge of the frame, partially hidden by trees, was a tall, and possibly thin figure in what appeared to be a black coat or robe. Its face was just a smudge, but even in the ancient photograph, you could tell it wasn't looking at the camera. It was looking at the children. 1954. My daddy's time as sheriff. 4 pages of notes in his neat handwriting, documenting sightings of what he called the watcher in the pines, cold spots, dead animals, a field of corn that withered overnight, each stalk frozen from within. And finally, the disappearance of Thomas Mercer, age 9, last seen riding his bicycle near the old quarry path. Never found. My daddy's last entry was just 3 words. It's gone now. Until 1986. Until now. What is it? Bobby asked, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. I shook my head. I don't know. But whatever it is, it's watching us. Learning. Learning what? Which ones of us are afraid? The next night, I gathered every deputy in the county, all 6 of them, and set up a perimeter around the area where most sightings had occurred. The old quarry, the cemetery, the stretch of woods behind the elementary school. We were armed with flashlights, radios, and shotguns loaded with rock salt. An old trick my daddy taught me, supposedly effective against things that aren't quite natural. The night was clear and cold, stars pricking the sky like holes in black velvet. We took our positions just before sunset and waited. Hours passed. Nothing moved but raccoons and the occasional deer. The radio remained silent except for regular check-ins. By midnight, I was beginning to think we'd wasted our time. Then the temperature dropped. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had opened a door to winter. The trees around me creaked as sap froze in their trunks. The beam of my flashlight dimmed, the batteries weakened by the sudden cold. My radio crackled. Sheriff? It was Rodriguez, our youngest deputy, stationed near the quarry. His voice was thin with fear. There's something. Static cut him off. I tried to respond, but the radio was dead in my hand. From the direction of Rodriguez's position came a sound like no animal I'd ever heard, a low, rhythmic clicking, like bones being tapped together. I ran toward it, my breath clouding heavily before me. The beam of my flashlight bounced crazily off tree trunks, casting wild shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. The clicking grew louder, more insistent. I found Rodriguez's flashlight first, lying on the ground, still on but barely glowing. 10 feet away was his shotgun, unfired. Of Rodriguez himself, there was no sign. But the ground where he should have been standing was different. The pine needles were arranged in a perfect circle, and at the center was a single black footprint that seemed to go down into the earth rather than rest upon it. The smell of fresh soil was overwhelming. Something moved in the trees ahead. Not a shadow this time, but something solid, something real. I raised my shotgun and advanced. The quarry opened up before me, a vast pit glowing faintly silver in the moonlight. At its edge stood a figure in black. It was tall, 7 feet at least, and unnaturally thin, like a reflection in a funhouse mirror. It wore what looked like an old-fashioned preacher's coat that reached to the ground, but the fabric moved wrong, rippling like water even though there was no wind. It was looking away from me, down into the quarry, where the moonlight reflected off the dark water at the bottom. As I watched, frozen in place, it slowly began to turn. I fired. The rock salt blast struck it squarely, and for a moment, the figure seemed to waver like heat rising from summer pavement. But it didn't fall. It didn't even flinch. It completed its turn, and I saw its face, or rather, where its face should have been. Beneath the wide-brimmed hat was only darkness, a void deeper than the night around us. But somehow, I could feel it looking at me, studying me, taking my measure. The air between us grew so cold it burned my lungs. My shotgun's metal was freezing to my gloves. I should have run. Any sane man would have. But I was sheriff of Millfield County, 3rd generation, and whatever this thing was, it was threatening my town. I chambered another round. "You don't belong here," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my gut. "Go back to wherever you came from." The figure tilted what should have been its head, an eerily human gesture of curiosity. Then it raised one long, impossibly jointed arm and pointed at me. Not threateningly, but almost like a child singling someone out for a game. The cold intensified, driving into my bones like nails. My vision began to darken around the edges. I tried to fire again, but my fingers wouldn't move. Ice crystals were forming on my eyelashes, on the collar of my jacket. From the thing came that clicking sound again, like bone against bone, but now it had a rhythm, almost like speech. With each click, images flashed in my mind, the quarry decades ago, men digging, removing something old from the earth. A box made of stone. Symbols carved into its surface like those on the library's foundation. The box being broken open by curious hands. And something being let out. Something that had waited a very long time. The images stopped as abruptly as they had begun. The figure lowered its arm, and the cold receded just enough that I could breathe again. It took a step toward me, moving like nothing I'd ever seen, not walking so much as flowing, each motion too smooth, too liquid. I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. It reached out again, one long finger extended. Not toward my face, but toward the badge on my chest. The silver star that my daddy had worn, and his daddy before him. The moment that cold finger touched metal, a sound like 1,000 screams filled my head. Not coming from the thing, but from somewhere deep inside me, as if it had awakened some ancestral memory of terror. I saw Millfield as it was before it was Millfield. Native American hunting grounds. Sacred space. Forbidden ground. A place where something had been imprisoned beneath stone and earth. Something the quarry had disturbed in 1834, and which returned every 40 years to search for a way back to wherever it had come from. Or a way to bring others here. The visions cleared, and I found myself on my knees, shotgun forgotten beside me. The figure was backing away, moving toward the tree line. Not retreating, not afraid, just finished. It had shown me what it wanted me to see. As it reached the first pines, it paused. That faceless void turned toward me one last time, and a voice that wasn't a voice spoke directly into my mind. "Keeper of this place," it said, the words like ice splinters in my brain. "Your kind imprisoned us. Your kind will free us. When the door opens again, we will all come through." Then it was gone, melting into the darkness between the trees like it had never been. I don't know how long I knelt there, shivering in the slowly warming air. Eventually, Bobby found me, helped me to my feet, led me back to my cruiser. Rodriguez turned up an hour later, wandering in the woods with no memory of what had happened after the cold came. Over the next few days, the sightings stopped. The unnatural frost disappeared. Dogs stopped cowering. Children slept soundly again. Life in Millfield returned to normal, or what passed for it. But I knew it wasn't over. The thing in black hadn't been defeated or driven away. It had simply finished. Found what it was looking for. Shown me what it wanted me to see. I went back to the library, dug deeper into the records. Found references to the quarry's first excavation in 1834. To a curious stone object, unearthed and subsequently lost. To Native American warnings about the land that had been ignored by eager settlers. And I found a pattern in those 40-year visits. Each time the Watcher came, it left behind fewer dead animals and more dead people. Each time, it stayed longer. Each time, it came closer to town. As if it were growing stronger. As if whatever door it had spoken of was opening wider. I'm an old man now. My grandson wears the sheriff's badge these days. He's a good boy, smart, but he doesn't believe the stories his crazy grandpa tells about things in the woods. But I know what's coming. It's 2026 now, 40 years since I saw the Watcher in the pines. I've made arrangements, iron and salt around my property. Ancient symbols, researched and carefully drawn, painted on my walls. A shotgun by my bed, though I know it won't do much good. Some nights, when the wind blows from the direction of the old quarry, I smell fresh earth and something older beneath it. On those nights, I check the locks twice and pull the curtains tight. Because I know the Watcher will return. And this time, I don't think it's coming alone. Some things you see out there, you pretend you didn't. But pretending doesn't make them go away. It just gives them time to grow stronger in the dark. And the dark is patient. God help us all, the dark is so very patient. No one wants to be the one who finds it, but last night, it was me. I've been sheriff of Millhaven for 37 years. Most folks around here say I've seen it all, and maybe that was true once. Before last night. Before I found that baby. The thing about small towns is they keep their secrets bundled up tight, like old photographs wrapped in wax paper and tucked away in attic trunks. They fester there, those secrets, growing blacker with each passing year until they seep through the paper, through the trunk, through the floorboards, and into the very foundations of the place. Millhaven has its fair share of those secrets. More than its fair share, if I'm being honest. I remember when I first heard about the babies. It was my second year as sheriff, still bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as my predecessor used to say. Mabel Whitaker came to my office one October morning, her mouth drawn into a tight line, eyes darting around like she expected someone to be eavesdropping from behind my filing cabinets. "Sheriff," she whispered, though we were alone. "You ought to know about what happens at St. Augustine's." I nodded, waited for her to continue. Mabel was the town librarian, meticulous, not given to flights of fancy. "Every year," she said, leaning forward, her voice dropping even lower. "Every year on October 17th, a baby appears on the church steps. No one knows where it comes from." I laughed then. Couldn't help myself. "Mabel," I said, "babies don't just appear. They come from somewhere. Someone's pulling your leg." Mabel didn't smile. She stood up, clutching her handbag to her chest like armor. "You'll see," was all she said before walking out. October 17th. I forgot about it, truth be told. Small towns generate gossip like cornfields generate stalks. It wasn't until 2 weeks later when Father Donnelly called me at 3 in the morning that I remembered Mabel's words. "Sheriff," the priest said, his voice trembling, "you need to come to St. Augustine's. Now." And there it was. A baby. Couldn't have been more than a few hours old, wrapped in a blanket that looked handmade but in a style I couldn't place. No note. No identification. Just a baby with eyes that seemed too aware, too focused for a newborn. The state took the child. We did an investigation. Interviewed everyone in town who might have been pregnant, checked hospital records in neighboring counties. Nothing. The case went cold. I thought it was a one-off. Some desperate mother, some terrible situation. But Mabel's words kept echoing. Every year. The next October 17th, I stationed myself across from St. Augustine's. All night I waited, thermos of coffee keeping me company, watching the church doors. Not a soul approached those steps. I dozed off around 4 a.m., just for a minute I swear. When I opened my eyes, there it was. Another baby. Same age. Same strange, knowing eyes. Same style of blanket. This pattern continued year after year. I'd set up surveillance, bring in deputies, even install cameras. But somehow, every October 17th, a baby would appear. The cameras would malfunction. Deputies would be called away on wild goose chases. I'd turn my head for just a moment, and there the child would be. The town began to whisper. Some said it was a cult. Others claimed it was the descendants of the Millhaven witch, a woman burned at the stake in 1687 on the very spot where St. Augustine's now stands. The older folks, they just shook their heads and closed their doors early on October 16th. For 35 years, I've watched this macabre ritual unfold. 35 babies. All healthy. All with those same eyes. All adopted out to families far from Millhaven, despite my efforts to keep tabs on them. Last night was October 17th again. I'm retiring in a month. My knees aren't what they used to be, and my eyes need help from glasses now. But I was determined this would be the year I solved the mystery. I didn't tell anyone about my plan. I didn't stake out the church from across the street. Instead, I went inside St. Augustine's at midnight and hid in the confessional. Father Donnelly is in on it too now, has been for years. We've grown old together, chasing this mystery. The church at night is a different creature. The stained glass that looks so bright and welcoming in daylight becomes ominous in darkness, the saints and angels twisted into watching sentinels. The wooden pews creak and groan as the old building settles, like arthritic joints protesting the cold. 3 hours I sat there, listening to every sound. The scratch of branches against the high windows. The distant hoot of an owl. The soft padding of mice in the walls. And then I heard it. Not footsteps. Not the opening of a door. But a sound that made the hair on my arms stand up straight. A soft humming, like a lullaby but in no tune I recognized. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the church with its eerie melody. The air changed. It's hard to explain, but it was like the atmosphere itself thickened, pressing against my skin. A smell filled my nostrils, sweet but not pleasant, like flowers rotting in stagnant water. I pushed open the confessional door just enough to peer out. The church was empty. The humming continued, growing louder, seeming to vibrate through the floorboards. And then I saw her. Or it. Standing by the altar was a figure in a long dress, the style at least a century out of date. She was bent over something in her arms, rocking gently back and forth. The humming came from her. I couldn't see her face. I didn't want to. There was something wrong about the way she moved, jerky yet fluid, like watching film footage where several frames had been removed. I should have called out. Should have confronted her. But 37 years of law enforcement instinct screamed at me to stay hidden, to not reveal myself. This was wrong. This was something that shouldn't be. The figure glided, not walked, glided, to the church doors. They opened of their own accord, though I know for a fact Father Donnelly had locked them. The night air rushed in, cold and damp, carrying with it the scent of earth recently turned. The humming stopped. The figure bent down, placing whatever was in her arms on the top step. Then she straightened and turned. God help me, she turned toward the confessional where I hid. I couldn't see her face because she had none. Where features should have been was only smooth, pale skin stretched over bone, like a canvas pulled too tight on a frame. Her head tilted, as if listening, or sensing. I didn't breathe. Didn't move. The cold sweat running down my back felt like ice water. After what seemed an eternity, she turned away. But she didn't leave through the doors. She simply faded, like mist burning off in morning sun. One moment she was there, the next just a suggestion of presence, then nothing. I waited 5 full minutes before I dared move. My joints protested as I unfolded myself from the confessional, my service revolver clutched in trembling hands. The church was empty again. I walked slowly to the doors, which now stood closed again though I never heard them shut. I hesitated, then pulled one open. There it was. Number 36. A baby, eyes open and alert, wrapped in that same strange blanket. But this time, something was different. This time, there was a folded piece of paper tucked into the blanket's folds. With shaking fingers, I unfolded it. The paper was old, yellowed with age, the ink faded to a rusty brown that looked uncomfortably like dried blood. The last one comes home, it read. I looked down at the baby. Unlike the others, this one smiled at me. A knowing smile that had no business on an infant's face. And then it laughed, a sound like dry leaves scraping across gravestones. I nearly dropped the child then. Because in that laugh, I recognized something. Something I hadn't allowed myself to see in 35 years of finding these children. My eyes. The baby had my eyes. Memories flooded back. Memories I buried deeper than any secret Millhaven had ever known. A summer night 36 years ago. A woman I met in the woods beyond town. Her strange beauty. Her promise of things no mortal should know. The bargain I'd made. 36 years, she'd said, her voice like honey over broken glass. 36 children. And the last one comes home. I'd forgotten. Dear God, how had I forgotten? The baby gurgled, reaching up with tiny fingers toward my face. I backed away, nearly tripping on the church step. I've taken the child to my home. What else could I do? It watches me as I write this, its eyes, my eyes, never blinking, never looking away. The clock on my wall reads 3:17 a.m. In a few hours, the sun will rise on October 18th. But I don't think I'll see it. Because something is scratching at my door. Something with many fingers. Something that hums a lullaby in no tune I recognize. And the baby is laughing again. No one wants to be the one who finds it, but last night, it was me. And tonight I think it's found me. If you're listening to this, if you're the new sheriff of Millhaven, heed my warning. Don't look for answers to this town's secrets. Some mysteries are meant to stay buried. Some bargains can never be undone. And if a baby appears on the steps of St. Augustine's next October 17th, run. Just run. Out on still water, there's no one beneath you, unless there is. That's what I told myself that summer, back in '82, when the reports started coming in. 43 years wearing this badge, and I've seen things most folks would call me crazy for believing. But this one still visits me in the dead of night when the wind gets to whispering through the pines outside my bedroom window. Milford Pond isn't much to look at. Just a wide, dark expanse of water surrounded by ancient oak and pine, nestled in that forgotten corner where our county lines blur with the next. Back then, before the drought years, it was deep, maybe 60, 70 feet at the center. The kind of depth that makes a man wonder what might be hiding down there, waiting. The first report came from old Tom Garvey. A lifelong fisherman, Tom had been taking his little aluminum boat out on Milford since before I was born. He came into the station one Tuesday morning in early June, hat in hands, eyes darting to the corners of the room like he half expected something to be following him. "Sheriff Denton," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Something ain't right out on Milford." I'd known Tom 40 years. Never seen him spooked, not even when that bear tore through his cabin back in '71. But there he was, hands trembling like autumn leaves. "What did you see, Tom?" I asked, pouring him a cup of the station's terrible coffee. Force of habit. "Didn't see nothing. Heard it." He took the coffee but didn't drink. "Was out night fishing. No moon. Still as death. Then it started." "What started?" "Knocking. Coming from underneath my boat. Like someone was down there, tapping to get in." I remember smiling. Had to be. The obvious explanation was that he drifted into some submerged branches. Or maybe his anchor line was hitting against the hull. "Wasn't no goddamn branches, Denton," he said, reading my thoughts. "I know what branches sound like. This was deliberate. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. Like a signal." I wrote it up as a courtesy. Figured Tom might be getting on in years, hearing things. Maybe the water playing tricks. Sound carries strange over still water. 3 days later, the Whitaker boys came in. Same story. Different part of the pond. Same pattern of knocks. Under their John boat at 2 a.m. By the end of the week, I had 7 reports. All from experienced men who knew Milford Pond like the backs of their hands. All describing the same thing, methodical knocking from beneath their boats. Always at night. Always in threes. I called Myers over at Fish and Wildlife. Asked if they'd released anything unusual into the pond. Some new species that might behave strange. He laughed. Said unless catfish had learned Morse code, he didn't have an explanation. The town started talking. Whispers at the diner. Theories at the bar. Old legends getting dusted off and re-examined. Martha at the library dug up some local history. Said the pond wasn't natural. That back in the 1800s, there'd been a small mining settlement there. Unsuccessful. Abandoned. The valley was intentionally flooded in the 1920s to create a reservoir. Progress, they called it. Cheaper than relocating the handful of rotting structures that remained. "They didn't move the cemetery," Martha whispered, like she was telling me a terrible secret. "Just let the water take it." Superstition builds quick in a small town. By July, no one was night fishing on Milford. The boat launch sat empty after sunset. But the stories kept spreading. I decided I needed to hear it for myself. Took my old Boston whaler out one Thursday evening. Clear night. Stars like diamonds scattered across black velvet. The water surface smooth as a mirror, reflecting the heavens so perfectly it was hard to tell where the sky ended and the pond began. Like floating in space. I cut the engine in the middle of the pond and just drifted, listening to the night sounds. Cicadas in the distant trees. The occasional plop of a fish breaking the surface. My own breathing. Hours passed. Nothing. Just the gentle rocking of the boat. My eyelids grew heavy. That's when I felt it more than heard it. A vibration. Coming through the hull. Then the sound. Clear as day. Knock. 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 Silence. Knock. 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 The sound was deliberate, purposeful, like knuckles on wood. I leaned over the side, shining my flashlight into the black water. Nothing but my own distorted reflection staring back. Knock. 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 It wasn't coming from one spot. It seemed to move around the bottom of the boat. Port side, then stern, then starboard. Something brushed against the hull. Not a knock this time. More like a hand sliding along the underside. I reached for my service revolver. Ridiculous, I know. What was I going to do? Shoot at the water? The boat rocked suddenly, like something had pushed up from below. I nearly went overboard. The flashlight beam cut wild arcs through the darkness as I scrambled to steady myself. When I regained my balance, the knocking had stopped. The night was silent again. I told myself it was nothing. A large fish. Maybe a snapping turtle. The mind plays tricks when you're alone on dark water. But part of me knew better. Back at the station, I dug deeper into the history of Milford Pond. Found old survey maps from before the flooding. There had indeed been a settlement there. Smaller than Martha had suggested. Just a cluster of miners' shacks and, sure enough, a small cemetery with maybe 20 graves. But there was something else, marked on the oldest map. A structure labeled simply as the meeting house, right where the deepest part of the pond now lay. I called the state records office. Asked if they had any information on this meeting house. The clerk who answered sounded bored until I mentioned the name of the settlement, Stillwater Mills. Then there was a long pause. What did you say you were looking for? Something had changed in his voice. I repeated myself. Hold on, he said. The line went quiet for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then he was back. Sheriff, those records are sealed. Sealed? It's a flooded ghost town. What's the seal? Court Order 1923. All records pertaining to Stillwater Mills and its establishments were sealed by federal injunction. I can't access them without proper authorization. That set off all kinds of alarms in my head. What kind of backwater mining camp gets its records federally sealed? I drove to the county seat the next day. Pulled some strings with Judge Harmon, who owed me a favor from way back. Got a court order to unseal those records. What I found turned my blood cold. Stillwater Mills wasn't just a mining camp. The meeting house wasn't a church or town hall. It was something else entirely. The documents described it as a place of communion, where the residents sought dialogue with those beyond the veil. Spiritualists, occultists, people who believed they could talk to the dead, or something worse. The records included transcripts of an investigation conducted in 1919, witness accounts describing rituals held at the meeting house, attempts to communicate with what they called the dwellers in the deep places, and they succeeded. At least they believed they had. One passage in particular haunts me still. The entity communicates to rhythmic percussions. 3 strikes signifying willingness to commune. It demands sacrifice for revelation. Small offerings at first, then larger. Always beneath still water where it dwells. The flooding of the valley wasn't for a reservoir. It was containment. Someone in power had decided that whatever was happening in Stillwater Mills needed to be buried, drowned, forgotten. Except now it was knocking again. By August, the reports had changed. It wasn't just knocking anymore. Fishermen spoke of shadows moving beneath the surface. Too large to be fish. Too deliberate to be currents. Dark shapes that seemed to follow boats. Water that turned unnaturally cold in specific spots, even on the hottest days. Then people started going missing. First was Kyle Jennings, 17, who'd taken his girlfriend out for a moonlight boat ride, trying to impress her with the local ghost story. The boat was found drifting the next morning, empty. Then Mike Hollister disappeared while swimming near the old boat launch. They found his clothes neatly folded on the dock. The official reports called them drownings, though no bodies were recovered. The pond was dragged. Divers went down. Nothing was found except for old timber, the rotting remains of a structure the divers said was big, like a meeting hall or social club. I should have closed the pond then. Should have blocked off access until we figured out what was happening. But it was the height of tourist season. The town council voted against it. Bad for business, they said. These are unfortunate accidents, not supernatural events. So I did the only thing I could. I went back out on the water, night after night, listening, waiting. The knocking returned, always in threes. I started knocking back. 3 raps on the hull with my flashlight. And it answered. Not just with knocks now, but with movement. The water around my boat would ripple, like something massive was shifting below. The boat would rock gently, as if cradled by unseen hands. On the 7th night, something changed. The knocks came faster, more urgent. Not in sets of 3 anymore, but continuous, like someone desperately trying to get attention. Then they stopped. Abruptly. The silence that followed was worse than the knocking. Heavy. Expectant. The water began to glow. Not bright, but a subtle phosphorescence emanating from the depths. Directly beneath my boat, something was giving off a pale, greenish light. I leaned over the side, peering down. The glow intensified, rising slowly toward the surface. I could make out a shape now. Large. Geometric. Not natural. It was the roof of a building, glowing from within. The meeting house. Somehow preserved beneath the dark waters all these decades. And something inside it was shining like a beacon. As the structure rose closer to the surface, I could see it wasn't coming up. My boat was sinking down. The water around me was being drawn downward, creating a subtle whirlpool effect. I was being pulled toward the source of that light. I started the engine. Nothing happened. The battery was dead. The boat continued its gradual descent, water now spilling over the sides. I had maybe minutes before I'd be swimming. That's when I saw them. Faces in the deep. Dozens of them, surrounding the glowing structure. Pale, bloated features. Eyes like black pits. Mouths open in eternal screams. Or perhaps in worship. They were rising now, too, reaching upward with decayed limbs. Not toward me. Toward the shore. Toward town. I fired my revolver into the air. 3 shots. Hoping someone would hear. Hoping someone would come looking. The boat was half submerged now. The cold water reached my waist. The faces drew closer. Close enough to see they weren't exactly human anymore. Their features had transformed into something older. More primal. Like something trying to remember what humans looked like, but getting crucial details wrong. One reached the boat. A hand, webbed, with too many joints, gripped the gunwale. I struck it with the butt of my revolver. It didn't flinch. Didn't react to pain. Just stared at me with those hollow eyes. Then it spoke. Not in words, but in knocks. 3 distinct taps against the hull. I understood then. They hadn't been trying to get in. They'd been trying to warn us. Too late. The water around me began to churn. Something vast was moving beneath the meeting house. Something the pale figures feared. I felt the boat tip, pushed from below. I went overboard, into the black water. The cold hit me like a physical blow. I thrashed, trying to stay afloat. My limbs grew numb almost instantly. This wasn't natural cold. This was something else. Something brushed against my legs. Massive, rough textured, moving with purpose. I kicked hard, swimming for shore, every instinct screaming to get away. Behind me, the water erupted. I didn't look back. Didn't need to. The shadow it cast fell over me like night falling all at once, blotting out the stars. I reached the shallows, scrambling onto the muddy bank. Only then did I turn. The pond's surface had gone still again. My boat was gone. The glow had vanished. There was nothing to suggest anything had happened at all, except for the silence. No frogs. No insects. Even the night birds had gone quiet, as if everything in nature was holding its breath. Walking back to my cruiser, soaked and shivering, I knew I'd glimpsed something that had been hiding beneath our town for generations. Something that the people of Stillwater Mills had contacted. Something they'd worshipped. Something that had demanded sacrifices. Something that was awake again. I made my report. Told them everything. They looked at me the way you'd look at a drunk or a lunatic. By morning, they'd convinced themselves I'd capsized by accident. Maybe hit my head. Imagined the rest. I closed the pond anyway. Put up barriers. Posted warnings. The town council fought me at first, but when the water level began to drop without explanation, dropping inch by inch each day despite no drought, no heat wave, they stopped arguing. By October, Milford Pond was half empty, revealing the skeletal remains of Stillwater Mills. Collapsed miners' shacks. The small cemetery with its tilted headstones. And at the center, the stone foundation of a large structure. The meeting house. Empty now. Whatever had dwelled there was gone. But the pond kept draining. Kept revealing more secrets. Old bones that weren't entirely human. Strange artifacts of stone and metal, carved with symbols no linguist could identify. They brought in experts. Archaeologists. Anthropologists. Government types in suits who asked questions but offered no answers. One night, they simply arrived in force. Cordoned off the entire area. By morning they were gone, along with every artifact, every bone, every scrap of evidence that Stillwater Mills had ever existed. The official story became contamination. Chemical seepage from the old mining operation. The area was declared hazardous. The remaining water was pumped out. The entire basin filled with concrete. Now it's a parking lot. Clean. Sterile. Safe. But sometimes, late at night, if you park there and roll down your windows and listen very carefully, you can still hear it. Knock. 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 Not from below anymore. From all around. From the air itself. Those poor bastards in Stillwater Mills. They thought they were contacting something from beyond death. They never realized they were just constructing a door. A way for it to enter our world. And doors, once opened, are damned hard to close. So that's my warning to you. If you're ever out on still water, and you hear knocking from below, don't answer. Don't acknowledge it. Just get to shore as fast as you can. Because out on still water, there's no one beneath you, unless there is. And now there is. There always will be. I've put up condemned signs before. Never had to nail one to a house that breathes. That summer was the hottest Millbridge had seen in 43 years. I remember because I was just a deputy when the last heat wave hit in '82, fresh-faced and still believing the worst thing that could happen in our little corner of nowhere was Darrell Simmons driving his tractor into Miller's Pond after too many at O'Malley's. Now I'm Sheriff Harrison, though most folks just call me Sheriff. Have done for 27 years. The badge doesn't shine like it used to, and neither do I. My bones creak almost as bad as my office chair, and I've seen enough in this town to fill a library of nightmares. But that house on Sparrow Lane? That's the one I can't forget. It sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, where the pavement gives up and the woods begin. A Victorian monstrosity, all gables and bay windows and a widow's walk that nobody ever walked on. Built in 1887 by Edwin Thorne, a railroad baron who decided Millbridge needed a touch of grandeur. Folks said he went mad in that house, started hearing voices in the walls. They found him hanging from the banister in '93, face purple as a sunset, eyes still open. The house passed through a dozen families after that, never keeping one for more than a few years. It stood empty after the Kellers left in 2003. Their son had fallen down the cellar stairs, or been pushed, depending on who you asked. He survived, but wouldn't speak for months afterward. When he finally did, his parents packed up and left town within the week. For 15 years, that house just sat there, collecting dust and rumors. Kids dared each other to touch the front door. Teenagers broke windows. The town council debated demolition every few years, but historical preservation laws and a dwindling municipal budget kept it standing. Then Ellis Monroe bought it in 2018. I remember him coming into my office that April, a tall drink of water and clothes too nice for Millbridge. Real estate developer from the city, he said. Wanted to renovate the old Thorne place, flip it for a profit. I tried to warn him about the house's history, but he just smiled that slick city smile. Superstition adds value these days, Sheriff. People love a good ghost story. 3 months later, Ellis Monroe disappeared. His truck was still in the driveway. His tools were scattered in the foyer. His half-eaten sandwich sat molding on a makeshift workbench in what used to be the parlor. But Ellis himself was gone. We searched that house top to bottom. Called in the county boys with their dogs. Nothing. By law, I had to wait 48 hours to file a missing persons report. But I knew, deep in my gut, that Ellis wasn't coming back. Something about that house felt wrong when we searched it. The air was thick, like breathing through wet cotton. And there was this smell, not the usual mustiness of an old house, but something sweeter cloying, like overripe fruit just starting to rot. The county detective assigned to the case was a young fella named Martinez. Smart kid by the book type. He interviewed Ellis's ex-wife, his business partners, his friends. Standard procedure. Maybe he just bailed, Martinez suggested, leaning against my desk a week into the investigation. Got in over his head with the renovation and skipped town. I just shook my head. Left his truck? His wallet? His phone? Nobody walks away from their whole life like that, son. Martinez shrugged. People do strange things, Sheriff. It wasn't until later that night, reviewing the case file alone in my office, that I noticed something odd in the photographs from our search. In one picture of the main staircase, the wallpaper pattern seemed to shift between adjacent panels. In another shot of the upstairs hallway, the door to the master bedroom appeared slightly ajar, though I distinctly remembered checking it and finding it locked. I went back to the house the next morning. The condemned sign wasn't my idea. Mayor Gunderson called an emergency town meeting after Ellis disappeared. Public safety concern, she said. But I knew it was fear. Fear that had been simmering in this town for generations, bubbling up whenever the Thorne house claimed another victim. I stood on the porch that morning, hammer in one hand, metal sign in the other. The wood of the front door seemed to pulse under my knock, like skin over a heartbeat. No answer, of course. I began hammering the sign into the doorframe. With each strike, I swear I felt the house flinch. The final nail slid in with no resistance, as if the wood had parted to accept it, like flesh healing around a splinter. That's when I heard it. A long, low wheeze coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sound a sleeping giant might make, stirring from 100-year slumber. The house was breathing. I stumbled back, nearly falling down the porch steps. Sweat soaked through my uniform despite the early hour. I told myself it was the heat playing tricks, or the old timber settling. Even then, I was lying to myself. I spent the next few days digging through the town archives. The library basement held records going back to Millbridge's founding, most of them untouched for decades. Miss Pearson, the town librarian for as long as anyone could remember, raised an eyebrow when I requested the property records for Sparrow Lane. "Historical research," I mumbled, her lips thinned to a bloodless line. "Be careful with history, Sheriff. Sometimes it bites back." The records revealed a pattern I should have seen years ago. Every owner of the Thorn house had experienced tragedy. Children falling ill with mysterious fevers. Spouses becoming withdrawn, then violent. And disappearances. So many disappearances, glossed over in the yellowing pages as relocations or unexpected departures. But it was a small leather-bound journal, tucked between tax records from 1891, that made my blood run cold. Edwin Thorne's personal diary. The final entry, dated 3 days before his suicide, read, "It wants to be fed. Always hungry. I hear it at night, breathing in the walls. Moving. Growing. I feel what I've built is no longer mine, if it ever was. God forgive me for what I've done." The journal mentioned renovations Thorne had made to the original house plans. Modifications to the basement. A secret room where he conducted what he called experiments in spiritual architecture. The schematics were missing, torn from the back of the journal. That night, I dreamed of corridors that stretched into darkness, of walls that pulsed with a heartbeat not my own. I woke gasping, sheets soaked through. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. Without thinking, I dressed and drove to Sparrow Lane. The house loomed against the night sky, a darker shadow among shadows. No streetlights reached this far into the cul-de-sac. Just moonlight casting everything in shades of silver and gray. My condemned sign gleamed on the front door, reflecting my flashlight beam. But something was wrong. The sign was crooked now, as if the wood around the nails had shifted. The door was ajar. I know what you're thinking. No sane person would enter that house alone at night. And you'd be right. But I've worn this badge too long to let fear stop me from doing my job. I called in my location to dispatch, checked my sidearm, and stepped inside. The foyer was exactly as we'd left it weeks before. Ellis's tools scattered across the floor, renovation plans laid out on a folding table. But the air was different. Warm and moist, like the breath of something large. My flashlight beam caught dust motes swirling in strange patterns, not settling as they should, but dancing as if caught in the current. I moved deeper into the house, floorboards groaning beneath my weight. In the kitchen, Ellis's coffee mug still sat on the counter, a film of green mold floating on the surface. But beside it lay something new, a cell phone. Not Ellis's, his had been an iPhone. This was an old flip phone, the kind nobody had used in years. I picked it up, clicked it open. The screen glowed blue in the darkness. One voice message. Against my better judgment, I pressed play and held it to my ear. Static, then a voice, distant and garbled. Inside the walls now. Can hear them moving. Not what we thought. The house isn't built on the foundation, it is the foundation. Load-bearing souls. The message cut off. The hairs on my neck stood at attention. That voice belonged to Richard Keller. Father of the boy who fell down the cellar stairs 15 years ago. The man who fled town with his family, never to return. How had his phone gotten here? A sound from above made me freeze. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, crossing the ceiling. Too heavy to be a raccoon or squirrel. Too measured to be settling timbers. I called out, "Police! Identify yourself!" The footsteps stopped. Then a thump. Not from above now, but from below. The basement. The basement door stood at the end of the kitchen, a black rectangle in my flashlight beam. It had been locked during our search for Ellis. Martinez had noted it in his report, said the key was missing. Now it stood open, darkness breathing from its mouth. I radioed for backup. Static answered. I tried my cell phone. No signal. Those footsteps upstairs started again, this time moving toward the staircase that would bring them down to my level. I made my decision, slipping through the basement door and pulling it shut behind me. The stairs groaned as I descended, wood complaining beneath my weight. My flashlight beam caught cobwebs and dust, but no signs of recent disturbance. The basement appeared ordinary. Stone foundation, dirt floor in some places, cracked concrete in others. Old shelving units lined the walls, empty save for ancient canning jars and rusted tools. But the dimensions were wrong. I'd seen the house from outside enough times to know its footprint. This basement was larger, extending beyond where the property line should be. And the ceiling, much too high for a house of this era. My beam caught something near the far wall, a metal glint. I approached cautiously, gun drawn now, instinct screaming danger with every step. It was a doorknob, attached to what appeared to be a section of wall. But as I drew closer, I could see the outline of a door, expertly camouflaged to match the surrounding stone. Edwin Thorne's secret room. I hesitated, hand hovering near the knob. Above me, the footsteps had reached the kitchen. Floorboards creaked directly overhead. I turned the knob. It rotated smoothly, as if recently oiled. The hidden door swung open with a sigh, releasing air that had been trapped for who knows how long. The smell hit me immediately, that same overripe sweetness I'd noticed before, but stronger now. Nauseating. My flashlight revealed a chamber perhaps 15 feet square. The walls were covered in symbols, not graffiti, but precise geometric patterns carved into the stone itself. At the center stood a stone altar of some kind, its surface stained dark. But it was the floor that made my breath catch. It wasn't dirt or concrete, but glass, or something like glass. Perfectly transparent, revealing another space below. A space that seemed to shift and move as I watched, like water disturbed by something large swimming just out of sight. The glass vibrated beneath my feet, a low hum that I felt more than heard. The air pulsed around me, in and out, in rhythm with the vibration. That's when I understood. The house wasn't built on a foundation. It was built on a mouth. From the doorway behind me came a voice, dry as autumn leaves. "You shouldn't be down here, Sheriff." I whirled, gun raised. Ellis Monroe stood in the doorway, but not the Ellis Monroe who had come to my office the year before. This man was gaunt, skin stretched tight over bones, eyes sunken into dark hollows. His clothes, the same clothes he'd been wearing when he disappeared, hung from his frame like flags on a windless day. "Ellis," I managed. "We've been looking for you." A smile spread across his face, too wide, revealing too many teeth. "Found me now, didn't you? But I'm not alone anymore. None of us are." "Us?" As if in answer, shapes moved in the darkness behind him. People, or what had once been people, standing in the basement shadows. I recognized faces: Richard Keller, his wife Susan, a teenager who'd gone missing in '97, Even old Edwin Thorne himself, noose marks still visible around his neck. "The house keeps us," Ellis said, his voice strangely doubled, as if someone spoke in unison with him. "Keeps us alive, after a fashion. Keeps us building." "Building what?" My voice sounded small in that underground chamber. Ellis's smile widened impossibly further. "The passage. It needs to be wider for what's coming through." The floor beneath me shuddered. The glass, if it was glass, began to spiderweb with cracks. I fired twice. Ellis didn't fall. The bullets passed through him as if he were smoke. I lunged for the door, shoulder-checking Ellis's form. It parted around me like fog, cold and damp against my skin. I took the basement stairs 3 at a time, erupted into the kitchen, ran for the front door. Behind me, the house seemed to contract, walls drawing inward like lungs emptying of air. The front door was so close. Then everything stopped. The walls ceased their movement. The breathing sound cut off mid-exhale. I reached the porch, gasping in the night air, stars wheeling overhead. I made it to my cruiser, hands shaking too badly to get the key in the ignition at first. As I pulled away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. Figures stood on the porch, Ellis, the Kellers, all of them, watching me go. And above them, the house seemed to lean forward slightly, as if straining against its foundations, eager to follow. I've put up 3 more condemned signs since that night. The originals keep disappearing, the nails I drove found scattered on the porch like discarded bones. People ask why I don't tear it down, that eyesore at the end of Sparrow Lane. The mayor's on my back about property values. Kids still dare each other to touch the door. But demolition crews refuse the job. Equipment fails mysteriously when they try. Last month, a bulldozer operator suffered a massive heart attack just as he approached the property line. Sometimes, driving past on night patrol, I see lights moving behind the windows. Not electric lights, something paler, colder. Moving in patterns that suggest many hands at work. Building something. The county wants to take over the case. Too many disappearances in one small town. 3 hikers vanished last fall, their last known location the woods behind Sparrow Lane. A census worker this spring, his car found empty in the cul-de-sac. I'll retire next year. Pass this burden to someone else. But I know what waits in that house. What lives in its walls, breathes through its windows. What grows stronger with each person who crosses its threshold. And sometimes, in my dreams, I feel it watching me. Patient. Hungry. Knowing that one day, curiosity or duty will draw me back inside. After all, I've put up condemned signs before. But I've never seen one breathe.